Chapter 11. With great care, Pansy managed to help Elizabeth get into a comfortable day gown without disturbing the bandage wrapped around her arm. Elizabeth waited while Pansy tidied up her room. She did not feel comfortable enough to go anywhere without her at this point. Not that the young maid would be able to stop a bullet for her, but they had both agreed that 4 eyes on the lookout would most definitely be better than only 2. Once all was in readiness, the two set forth on their mission. They had determined to try to be as systematic as possible. Pansy was going to take notes as Elizabeth questioned the staff members. They had agreed to start with a footman guarding Elizabeth's door. "Thank you for your efforts on my behalf, Johnny. I am sure this was not an easy assignment. Trying to remain alert and vigilant when nothing ever happens is tiresome, is it not?" "Oh, no, my lady. It was a great privilege to guard your ladyship." The young man blushed deeply in chagrin. "Of course, I did not mean to imply otherwise. I am just grateful, you see. Would you mind if I ask you a couple questions?" She was going to take advantage of his flustered state. "Not at all, of course, my lady." His blush deepened. "Were you familiar with the previous Lady Sinclair?" His hot blush now consumed him, and Elizabeth worried the poor young man might faint at her feet. But she did not relent. She needed this information. "Somewhat familiar, my lady," he answered shakily. "Would you have any opinion as to what sort of mood she was in toward the end of her life? Did she strike you as sad or worried or happy?" The young footman looked confused by the question, but seemed relieved by it as well. "Oh, well, I never presumed to consider it much, my lady, but I would not say she was sad. Perhaps a little bit worried at times. She was disappointed that the master did not want to return to London, but rather than being sad, she was angry about it. She would yell and throw things." He began to look uncomfortable once more. "Is that what you were looking for, my lady?" "Yes, Johnny, thank you. That was most useful. Just one more thing. Would you know, by any chance, if the Countess had received any visitors during the last week of her life?" "That I couldn't rightly say, my lady. I'm not usually around for that. You would be best asking Mr. Patrick about that. I'm usually a footman with the kitchens, which is why his lordship picked me to be a guard for you, for my strength, not my knowledge." Elizabeth couldn't help her peal of laughter at the footman's words. "I appreciate your honesty, Johnny, and I will take your advice about speaking with Mr. Patrick." They made their way throughout the house, speaking to every servant they encountered. A clear picture had formed of Lady Barbara, the Earl, their awkward relationship, and the turmoil Lady Barbara had caused. No one had a clear idea of who might have wanted her dead, but it was obvious the lady was not in despair or entertaining thoughts of ending her life. Wondering how to interview the Earl's secretary as well as the outside servants, the two had sat down for a brief rest when the Earl came upon them. "It has come to my attention that you have been interrogating the entire household staff." His tone was calm and even, but Elizabeth thought she could detect a touch of anger sparkling in his eyes. Her eyes flicked to Pansy, who had stood at the Earl's arrival, and was now gripping the fire-poker tightly. Elizabeth was as safe as she could possibly be while in the Earl's household. "That's correct, I have been. Is that a problem?" she asked, keeping her own tone calm and neutral while waiting anxiously for his response. He hesitated while looking at her quizzically. "It's not a problem exactly. I would just have preferred if you had asked me about it first. I would have liked to hear what everyone had to say as well." Elizabeth nodded, although she wasn't sure what she was agreeing with. "I thought of that, my lord, but I was concerned your staff might not be as forthcoming in your presence." The Earl appeared to be thunderstruck by her words. "You might have a point there, my lady. Would you be willing to share with me what you have learned thus far?" He paused, glanced briefly at Pansy, and then looked back at Elizabeth with a jovial smile. "And could I also ask why your maid looks as though she was quite prepared to smash me with the poker?" Elizabeth and Pansy gasped in unison, but the Earl never took his eyes off his wife's face. She could feel the blush rising in her cheeks. "She is doing her best to keep me safe, my lord." "I appreciate that, but does she not think I can do that? I'm getting the impression that she actually thinks that I might be a threat to you." Elizabeth could see from the muscle clenching in his jaw that he was not as calm as he let on, but the Earl's tone revealed his effort to remain patient and unperturbed. She could only offer a helpless shrug. We hadn't yet ruled you out completely. I see. Once again, his tone revealed very little, but Elizabeth actually suspected that his feelings were hurt by her words. His warm voice took on cooler tones as he questioned her further. Did you think I could be behind your attack from the beginning, or is it something someone said? She almost couldn't bear to look at him, but Elizabeth was not about to start cowering at the Earl's feet. Despite her distracting attraction to the man, she had valid reasons for being wary, even if she had equally valid reasons not to suspect him. She forced herself to meet his eyes as she answered his questions. From the beginning, my lord. However, my investigation has led me to suspect that you are innocent of the attack on me and your first wife's death. So you do think they are connected, and you thought I was involved. What made you think that? Did I do something that made you think I was capable of killing my wife? Elizabeth was nearly discomfited by the way he could sound so casual and pleasant, while looking at her as though she had lost her mind. Had he truly never realized she had believed those rumors? She wondered. She had been certain he had heard her say as much to her mother the night of her ruination. There were so many rumors swirling about you in London, my lord. I didn't know what to think. Did you actually marry me, thinking it was possible I had killed my wife? Now he could no longer hide his rising temper. Elizabeth saw Pansy tense with the poker, ready to defend her. Elizabeth raised her chin, refusing to cower. I did, my lord. My mother would not allow that to be sufficient reason not to marry you. Those words made Elizabeth's composure waver, which was reflected in the quaver in her voice. The Earl's indignation waned in the face of her distress. I'm so sorry, Elizabeth. That must have been a trial for you. I had no idea you were labouring under such a concern. It does explain why I was not allowed to visit you after you had been shot, and the wariness I have encountered in your eyes at times. The Earl sighed heavily before continuing. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. I knew those rumours were circulating, and I did nothing to quell them. I know I didn't kill her, but I do feel a certain amount of guilt. For one thing, I was not able to save her, nor keep her safe. And for another, if I had done as she asked and taken her to London, she wouldn't have been here to jump or be pushed. Is that also why you looked so guilty when I was shot? Elizabeth cocked her head to the side, trying to see into his mind, wishing to understand him. Did I look guilty? His grin revealed that he was not harbouring any ill will toward her. He finally sat beside her, taking the spot Pansy had recently vacated, then took hold of one of her hands she had rested in her lap. Elizabeth felt the flutters resume in her belly with his proximity. She brought her attention back to what they had been saying. Yes, it was written all over your face when you first saw me in the gig. Well, once again, I had not done enough to protect my wife. I should have told you not to ever leave the estate without me, but I feared you would consider me an ogre. Elizabeth smiled to show she held no grudge toward him. I would have. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in thought, while Pansy watched with a fierce stare. Elizabeth couldn't help smiling her appreciation, even though she was becoming quite convinced they had suspected the Earl needlessly. She decided to tell him about the diary. Did you know your wife was involved with Broderick, my lord? Is that why you questioned me about him? How did you find out about it? From questioning the servants? Was that a yes, my lord? Yes, I knew. I only found out at the end. She was furious that I wouldn't listen to her and return to London. She let it slip once when she was raving about how horrifically unkind I was, that Jason would never treat her thusly. She was ridiculous. If he had been all that was kind and noble, he would never have involved her in his plots. During that week after she allowed it to slip, I had merely suspected they had been involved in some way, that she had a tender for him, but she must have communicated with him unbeknownst to anyone. Whatever she had found out left her truly terrified, and she finally confided it all to me. My biggest regret is that I did not take the threat seriously. I was angry that I had been tricked into marrying her, but I had figured that part out already. I just didn't know why. When I found out how truly cold-blooded it was, I felt sick to my stomach. But she paid the price for my inattention. And so have you. The Earl took her cold hands into his warm ones and tried to chafe warmth back into them. "I am so sorry, my dear. I never wished to see you hurt. I truly thought the danger toward my wife was gone with Barbara. I had no idea it would somehow transfer to you. I swear to you, my only involvement is in the fact that I did not properly protect you." "I know, my lord. I do believe you. And I do not hold you responsible. I am quite sure Broderick must be behind it in some way. The only trouble is that we have no idea why. What could he hope to gain by getting rid of me? I wasn't involved with him in any way. When I realized Broderick was involved, I had thought it connected in some way with my friend Rose and her efforts to thwart a different scheme of his. But I do not see how or why. There must be something else. Do you have any ideas?" "The only thing I was able to glean from Barbara was that he was planning to use me to influence the government. I suspect I am not the only lord in the house that he tried to entrap in this way. If he had enough of us, he could influence decisions and votes. It was a brilliant plot if it were not so convoluted as to be impossible to manage. The man is clearly not all right in the head." "I rather suspect it is the madness of brilliance, my lord, and I worry there could be many others he has tried this scheme with. What if he has succeeded? Is there any way that we can stop him if he has?" The Earl appeared much struck by her words, but offered her a rather helpless-looking shrug. "That is a dreadful thought, my dear, and one that certainly will give us nightmares. I can assure you, I will continue to investigate the man. If we can stop him directly, it should put an end to whatever schemes he's hatched." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, chewing her lip in indecision. When she noticed her husband's eyes focus on her mouth, she felt heat sweep into her cheeks, and she launched into speech to hide her confusion. "I found her diary, Lady Barbara's diary, and I read it. It was in the room with all her things. I searched through that whole room trying to find out more about her. I wanted to know how she died because the gossips had claimed you had killed her, and I was afraid." She felt her face getting hotter and hotter as she talked, and she couldn't look at him any longer, even though he was looking at her with so much understanding written on his face. She felt embarrassed over her worries and the fact that she had searched through his wife's things. Lord Sinclair still held her hands in his warm ones, and he tightened his grip, forcing her to bring her eyes back to his face, searching to see if he was angry with her. "I am so sorry you have had to go through this, my dear. I swear to you that I will do my level best to make it up to you. But for the time being, we need to get to the bottom of this. Why she was killed and why someone attacked you must be answered. There is no apparent connection between Barbara and you, or even between you and Broderick. What did you learn from the diary?" Elizabeth blushed again, wishing she did not have to discuss his former wife with him. She didn't really have any friends. I wouldn't say exactly that she had enemies, although from her attitudes it is possible that she made some. "I'm sorry. I hate to say that to you, or even to speak ill of her since she is not here to defend herself." "Do not trouble yourself about my feelings, my dear. From what I know of you, you won't say anything stronger or meaner than anything I have thought myself. And if you can think of anything that might help, or if your thoughts can help us sort it out, please just say whatever you have to say. I promise I shan't judge you harshly on your words." She smiled her gratitude and tried to continue. "I cannot say what her history was with Broderick, but he clearly held influence over her. She thought very highly of him, and it was under his influence that she set a cap for you. She had thought she should marry a duke, but decided that you would do based on whatever Broderick told her." "That I knew about," the Earl commented, nodding encouragingly. "But she was supposed to get you to come back to London in order for you to take your seat in the house, and Broderick was supposed to be able to control you through her. But I had to tell you, I really don't know how Broderick thought to accomplish that, since the poor lady had absolutely no interest in political affairs. From what I read in her diary, it seems she was quite enamoured with the thought of you gaining more power. She quite thought that would in turn transfer to her and she would be able to lead in society. She even aspired to become one of the patronesses. The poor woman just was at a loss of how to get you to cooperate. But how did Broderick think she was going to be able to influence you if she couldn't even bear to listen to you talk about politics? As I told you, it was far too convoluted to have worked." Elizabeth wasn't completely convinced. While she had no admiration for Broderick, she had a healthy respect for the man's intellect. She wouldn't rest easy until the matter was fully resolved. They needed to get to the bottom of things. Anyhow, they must have been in communication in some way. That is one thing we need to investigate. I have been able to ascertain that she was receiving messages, but no one seems to know where the messenger came from. I will set my secretary to research that. I must admit to you, my dear lady, I am impressed that you have been able to find that out. I asked all of our personal servants for information after her death, and no one told me that. Clearly, you have been far more thorough than I was. Elizabeth was delighted by his praise, but tried to downplay her efforts. I had access to more information than you did. I would have had it too if I had thought to search her room. She wrinkled her nose at him. Well, it did surprise me that you hadn't. She was taken aback that he grinned at her words, but she carried on with her recounting of the information. So, whatever Broderick was telling her was making her desperate. Combined with your refusal to leave your estate to return to London, she was becoming fearful. But she doesn't say if he threatened her or what he did. I still cannot say if she was lured to the roof and pushed, or if her fear drove her to jump. I have trouble believing that she would have jumped, though. She was too obsessed with her own appearance. I would think she would choose a more romantic mode of death, like poison. Do you really think poison would be romantic? Lord Sinclair was incredulous. She mentioned seeing the play Romeo and Juliet, so it led me to the conclusion that she would consider it so, my lord. I most certainly do not. She cast him a reproachful look before continuing. Other than many long descriptions of all her gowns, as well as several snide comments about her new life here, she doesn't have anything else to say except for a few strange references to your cousin, Hector. Hector? What did she have to say about him? He had grown still at the mention of his cousin. The air almost grew thick from the tension that suddenly filled it. His usually warm voice had cooled a little as he questioned her. She didn't like him very much, and felt that you made a far superior earl than he would. The earl sat in silence, staring at her as horror filled his face. Hector is a distant cousin of mine. We Sinclairs have not been a prolific lot. I think I already told you that your large family was one of the things that drew me to you. I thought it would be lovely for any children we shall have to be able to enjoy many cousins, as well as aunts and uncles. If I should die without issue, all that is entailed will go to Hector. If he is in league with Broderick, it would explain the attack on you. He either wants me to be tried for murder, since it would be harder to explain away the deaths of 2 wives, or he's hoping I will die of a broken heart and he will inherit. Was your heart broken by Barbara's death? Elizabeth was rather horrified that he might have been that attached to the wretched woman. No, but I do think I might go into a decline if something else would happen to you. Elizabeth burst out laughing. Now you are just being droll, my lord. Let us be serious. Do you truly think it is possible that Hector might be the link we are looking for? As far as I knew, Barbara hadn't even met Hector. We are not at all close. So if she wrote about him in her diary, then it is starting to look like the only possibility to make any sense. It turns my stomach to think on it, but it should be reasonably easy to investigate. He paused and regarded her seriously. Thank you, my dear lady. I really didn't think it possible that you would be any more successful than me in investigating these attacks. But you have proven me wrong. I am quite convinced you shall have to accompany me in all estate business from now on. You shall be a most excellent partner. Elizabeth was bashful over his words. If you had thought to search her room, you would have found the exact same thing, and perhaps even faster than me, as you would have been familiar with things and would not have needed to nap as I have frequently had to do. Or I would have flung the book across the room in disgust after 2 or 3 lengthy descriptions of gowns she had purchased. Laughing, Elizabeth said, That would be a distinct possibility, my lord, and I will admit that I was tempted on occasion myself. After sharing a chuckle with her, the Earl once again grew serious. I shall set my steward and secretary to investigating the 2 threads you have brought up, but I am sorry to have to tell you that you will have to remain ensconced within the house for a few more days, until we have figured all of this out, I do not want you in danger. We cannot even be sure if any of the servants are involved, so I do not trust that you would be safe on the grounds." Pansy had been silent throughout all of this conversation, but she must have twitched at the Earl's words, bringing their attention to her. Elizabeth grinned at her. "I have Pansy to look after me, my lord. She has been making the servants taste the food they bring me in order to prove that it has not been poisoned." The Earl threw back his head and chortled. Elizabeth suspected it was a release of pent-up tensions causing his amusement, as she had not said anything sufficiently droll to merit such an uproar, but she could not help joining in his laughter. "I am delighted that you have such a faithful companion as your Pansy, but you must promise me that you will not do anything or go anywhere without keeping me apprised. I need to know you are safe." "I promise. Believe me, I am quite vividly aware of the possibilities of what could happen to me." She pulled one of her hands out of his grasp in order to reach up and cover her bandaged arm. "I have no interest in a repeat performance." She grimaced at the thought. "You are going to be heartily bored," the Earl warned. "Perhaps you could teach me billiards to while away the time?" Her voice took on wheedling tones. "I will be helping with the investigation, my dear lady." He was apologetic but firm. Elizabeth shrugged. "Well, then, I shall teach myself, and become so skilled that I will trounce you when you finally have time to play with me." She paused and regarded him solemnly. "You will have a care as to your own safety, though, will you not?" "To be sure." "And you will return me the courtesy of keeping me informed?" "I will do my best, my dear, but now I must leave you to set things in motion." "Very well." Elizabeth nodded and watched him stride toward the door. She realized her mistake, and just as he was about to leave the room, she called after him. "My lord, I have changed my mind," she began as she rose to her feet. "I cannot allow you to conduct this investigation without me. Considering the fact that it very much involves me, I do believe I should be at your side while we figure this out. Really, who else could keep me safer?" She heard Pansy's huff of dismay at being thus dismissed, but while she smiled in reaction, she did not take her eyes from her husband's face. He appeared thunderstruck by her words. Blinking to better focus after his surprise, the Earl looked at her with shrewd eyes. "Do you realize that my guilt is making it hard to resist your request?" "I did not realize I had framed it as a request, my lord," she began. "But if your guilt makes it easier for you to concede, I am not above using that." The Earl laughed and grabbed the hand of her uninjured arm. "Very well. I fear I may regret this, but come along." Pansy padded after them, refusing to allow her mistress out of sight. They made a strange little parade as they hurried to the Earl's library, where he promptly rang for his secretary and the butler. Mr. Patrick was the first to respond, and Justice sent him in search of the steward. It didn't take over long for all to respond to the summons. Within 15 minutes, the library was nearly overflowing with people as the steward, the butler, and the Earl's secretary were standing in front of his desk. Justice had seated Elizabeth in his large chair, while he stood beside her, and Pansy watched attentively from the corner behind them. "No doubt some or all of you have arrived at the same conclusion as we have. We are convinced that there is a connection between the attack on my Countess and the death of Lady Barbara. We have discovered that Lady Barbara was in communication with a man named Sir Broderick in the days and weeks leading up to her death. We need to find out how they were communicating. Messengers were bringing notes for her, but we do not know who they were or where they originated. I need you," he indicated the steward, "to go to the village and ask around about anyone who would have been bringing messages to Lady Barbara. This needs to be done discreetly and in a non-threatening manner. If it was someone local passing the messages, they might fear reprisals. You have to reassure them that I will not be angry. I just need the information." Turning to his secretary, Justice continued, "We have reason to believe that my cousin Hector is somehow involved. I will need you to travel to Hampstead to ascertain his whereabouts both this week and the week 2 years ago when Lady Barbara was killed. And also, find out what connection Hector has with Sir Jason Broderick. Report back to me as quickly as you are able." Both men bowed and left the room quickly. What about me, my lord? What can I do to help? The butler wanted to be involved. I need you to think back to 2 years ago. Were there any servants that were new right around the time of my marriage? I have to admit I was fairly distracted around that time, and I have no idea if any of the servants were new. Well, there were the servants that came with her ladyship, the butler said, puzzled. We didn't have anyone else join the household besides them. Did she bring anyone other than her personal maid? Justice was surprised. 2 footmen arrived with her luggage, besides the maid, my lord. I guess I should have spoken to you before sending off the steward. That would be how she was getting her messages. But we still need to know who they were speaking to. Hurry and see if the steward has left yet. We ought to tell him who the footmen were and provide him with a description, so that he can ask about them. But, my lord, one of them is still in your employ.